Oh, well, we've just had a brilliant interview there with Graham Goulden. Graham was working as a police officer for 30 years. And the last 8 years of his work was with the Scotland's Violence Reduction Unit. And we didn't even get a chance as an introduction. So this is your introduction. We literally went straight into it. So sit back and enjoy this. We're going to talk about everything, the issues affecting boys and girls. And this idea of masculinity, is it helpful, is it not, are we not looking in the right places about how we can fix society's problems? And yeah, it's been absolutely brilliant. Enjoy today's Boxing Saves Lives interview with Graham Goulden. Thank you.
And he talks about the best. He was an ex-football player, quite high level football player in America. And he talks about transformational coaches. That transactional, the one that coaches to win. It's a very selfish coach, whereas the transformational coach, as you know, is the one that seeks to transform the person. That they're already there, but it's how do you make that person the best person they can be? So it's great what you're doing.
And I had this conversation the other day with James Docherty from the VRU.
I know
actually,
James.
and, yeah, I was going to say, I know I didn't bring around to that part of the conversation. How you must know each other. I thought, okay. But we had this kind of bond between us. We were talking about it. It's exactly that. It's about the transformation. It's about the boxing is just a part of it. I often tell the people, if this is about going beyond the ropes, beyond the walls of a gym, boxing is just a part of it. It's just, as James called it, the hook. It's the hook to get you. It's about speaking to young people, having conversations. If I'm getting them into a boxing gym to box and win medals, then that's about boxing. If I'm getting in there to, start opening up to coaches and talking about things that are going on, that's transformation.
It is, but then if you take care of that stuff, then the medals will come automatically. Sure. That's what Joe talks about. I've helped train a program in the States, coaching boys to men, and it's a really, so this is like athletic coaches in high schools or in colleges in America, and it's like it's like I don't know, it's a number of weeks, and every time the coaches with the players, they just arrange a 15-minute timeout, and they talk about, I think the first one is about the coaches. What do they call it? It's the coach's promise to the team. I'm here for you. It's building that relationship. Then every week they'll start to talk about, so there's one, respect, integrity, and non-violence. So let's talk about our relationships with each other. Let's talk about our relationships with our opponents. Let's then go into things around, disrespect online. Let's talk about violence against women. There's so many things you can be just 15, 20 minutes. But as you say, using sport as the hook for the young people is incredible. And it's something that I'd like to see more of in this country.
I mean, that's kind of sounds a little bit similar to what we're trying to achieve down here, because give or take the lockdowns and tier 4s and all that we hit around Bedfordshire, and we were planning on rolling out boxing in schools for 6-week programs for people. But also as part of that, we had this organization called Link to Change, and what they were going to come and do is link in at the beginning of our session. So each week you'd have 20-minute talk about healthy relationships, grooming, exploitation, being protected online and stuff like that. So we were going to tie that in, and it's just really frustrating that all of these things have happened, because that's where we want to be. But that sounds like exactly what you're talking about there, Graham.
It's similar. It's just that, and somebody put it into a really nice format. So there's a coach I know in the States who just, he got hold of it and he put it into a real, these are indestructible. You can't, if they get wet, who cares? So they're really good. And, it's Futures Without Violence. And maybe this is something, I'm doing some work with Kimberley next year. You never know, something we could look at developing. And this can be applied to sports teams. It can be applied to youth clubs. It's just that, I think it was the last 2 years ago, I got approached by the Premier League charity to develop a coaching program for community coaches around things like knife crime and bullying. And it was great. I thought this is good. So they were really keen to get me on board. But then I think they got money from the government and they went elsewhere because, I think the government were really pushing the knife crime agenda. And for me, that's wrong, because for me, it's, we don't have a knife problem. We have a violence problem. I don't know if James talked about that. We need to really start to look at the mindset of the person. What we're talking about today around masculinity, start talking about these issues, rather, because if we just keep focusing on the knife, that will become the focus.
Yeah.
And knives will sit on tables all day until someone picks them up and uses them.
100%. Yeah, totally agree with that. And it's that attachment that we're thinking about, the cycle of violence that is happening within the home, the neglect, the poverty, the racism, all of that stuff is leading to the point that these things are happening. I often say to my people, it just makes me laugh the way people talk about, well, it wasn't like that in my day. People used to have a scrap in the playground. And okay. So shouldn't that be a warning to you that things have changed? Now we need to be looking at why things have changed. That's what we need to be focusing on now. There's no point in saying, oh, this happens now, it's a lot worse then. Why? What has been that, that thing that's actually sparked that complete change among young people?
Yeah, no, I think many years ago we had more of that village community feel where we looked out for each other, and I think we've lost a lot of that in this country. We've lost our compassion and care for our fellow human being, and it's for me, it's as simple as that. It's about how do we activate Scotland, and I think we're seeing it around trauma and ACEs in Scotland, but how do we activate your communities? Just to look out. It's that, Kimberly talks about the village. It takes a village to raise a child. And I think we've lost that as well. We've lost that. And I think, people have had trauma in the past. They've had trauma for centuries. But, I often get, I was fine. I've not turned out to be a knife wielding maniac. Yeah, but why was that? Why do you think that is? You've had trauma. So why is that? So I think there's a lot of young people out there just now who haven't got that buffer, haven't got that consistent person that we need in our life, whether it be a parent, carer, uncle, whatever, or whatever that person's going to be. And we need to get back to that. We need to help parents to be the best they can be. We need to get communities looking out for kids, stop being negative about children, young people, and start to understand the challenges that are out there, especially just now with COVID.
Yeah, and I think we have the situation like you've just described about how things used to be. And obviously, we all could be a little bit nostalgic at how things were great, but there is a certain amount of it. I spoke to people before who've been involved in stuff. I said a few years ago, people see some young kid out in the street, they'd be wringing their hands going, you need to get home. Whereas now they could be rubbing their hands going, right, there's a kid out on the street. What can we do with this kid? How can we exploit this kid?
Yeah.
And it's that kind of weird balance, this kind of, like you said, it's disappeared. We're not really communities anymore. We're fed information a lot through social media and through the media that kids are predominantly bad. And you're like, you see this more and more anymore now. And I did a little video the other day about the attention economy and how social media can influence how we think. But that's just the drip, drip, drip. It's not a new thing. Newspapers have been doing this for years, telling us kids are bad. All of these things we look out for, folk devils, moral panic. But now it just seems to have been ramped up more to the point where people are just going, oh, it's their culture in it. Is it? Is it their culture? Is it really? Is your kid doing that? Is your grandson doing that? Is your brother's kid doing that? If they're not, what's changed?
Yeah. And if you think about it as well, excuse me, the whole focus on drugs in this country is actually leading to more vulnerability in our kids. It's creating, because it's drugs that's often at the root of the violence. No, not the root of the violence. It's at the background. It's a factor for the violence. So let's regulate drugs. Let's stop this war on drugs that isn't working. That's actually leading to young people being criminalized. That is leading to them to being groomed by gangs to sell the drugs. If we didn't have a drugs market, illicit drugs market, then there wouldn't be kids. There wouldn't be any money to be made. So we need transformational thinking in this country. It can be scary. It'll sound really scary, but you know what? The best ideas are the ones that scare the hell out of you, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I read the book by Neil Woods over the last couple of months, where he goes over the cover. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And even yesterday, I could see him. He was digging somebody out on Twitter who was complaining about this, and he was like, "We need to start getting rid of the drug problem." Like he was quoting about Switzerland and how hard drugs are actually prescribed over there, and the loss of the drop in admissions to hospital. Obviously, the crime. They don't have county lines behaviour over there.
Mhm.
And somebody said, there's a real reason why I don't, buy my can of tenants from, a 12-year-old kid in a Dan flat. It's like, it's just, I know exactly where you're coming from, is that until that part of it begins to change, then we kind of in this cycle where we're kind of firefighting, and we're not,
Yeah,
although
and the
we're working
government,
at the causes, we're
I
not
think,
getting out
I
the
think
top.
Westminster has, been part of the problem. It does that tougher on crime every few years. The tougher on crime rhetoric comes in, and that's part of the issue. In Scotland, I think we've got potential to do something radical around drugs. I think we're quite fortunate. I think England, though, with the way that the Conservative Party are, they really are the party of law and order. They're claiming to be the party of prevention. They're funding the Home Office is funding all these VRUs, but they're recruiting 20,000 officers, and they aren't recruiting 20,000 officers to be community police officers. They're going to do stop and searches, and that's the conflict that is going to happen in the next few years. You're going to have all the prevention work like Kimberley's doing and you're doing, and then you're going to have strict enforcement. And the potential is the kids are going to be doing well with you, but then stopped and searched and criminalised. And anyway, it's there's so much you can talk about on this topic.
Well, listen, let's talk about you then to begin with, because you were 30 years as a police officer. You finished up as being a chief inspector. You started work with the Scottish VRU. So tell me about how you saw things progressing through your career to where we are now in terms of the behaviours among young people, and how things have gotten to where we are right now, do you think?
I think it's great. It's a good question, and I'll talk about it through my lens as a police officer. I spent 30 years as a police officer in Scotland, and I often say that my career was like two-thirds and a third. So 20 years, I looked at society through the lens of criminal justice. So that's about applying the law, locking the bad people up, filling the prisons up, searching, arresting, and all that stuff. And that I was good at that. It was easy. That was the easy bit. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. When I joined the police in Edinburgh in the late 80s, it was the train spotting days, the train spotting culture. And, violence, drugs were everywhere. And it was just such an active playground as a cop, as a enthusiastic young officer. And a few times during those years, I would get a bit frustrated and thinking, why am I, why are people coming out of prison and doing the same thing over and over again? Why is the same families creating problems in our communities? What is going on there? But we just turned up, arrested the culprits, and did what we thought the public, and what back then and probably still now the public want us to be doing. And then 2008-9, I got a chance to work with the violence reduction unit in Scotland, and so I went from that enforcement lens to a health and well-being lens, the public health lens, and was really forced to take my police hat off and start to look at things totally differently. You start to look at, the best time to stop issues of violence isn't after it happens. Surely it's beforehand. Surely it's going back into childhood and starting to look at the chaos that far too many young people are growing up in. I started to see that. I then started to look at, why in my first 20 years, with the vast majority of people that I was speaking to as victims, as perpetrators, were men, boys and men. Why was that? And we didn't ask that question. We never asked the why question. And I think if I'd started to ask the why question back then, I probably would have been ridiculed and isolated from policing, because these are just bad people who are doing bad things. So the VRU really started to shift my thinking and start to think, it's often about the situation. I was asked the other day about, is testosterone the problem for violence? And my view is no, it's not. We have that debate all the time. Why is it that men are more violent and aggressive? Is it because of testosterone? It's that debate will never go away, despite the evidence. But for me, it's often about the situation a person finds themselves in. Good people are doing bad things. You spoke to James Docherty. James is. I would trust James if I had a young kid. I would trust James with my baby. I trust him to the hilt, because he's a lovely, lovely man. But I think as a police officer, you're in that system where James is a bad person. He's done a bad thing. He deserves to go. And and he talks about his past, and accountability is really important. But we need to start thinking about giving people the chance, the opportunity, the second chance, the third chance, the fourth chance. So, back in my first part of my career, I looked at society as the deficit, as the problem, and now move, the last 10 years and now in retirement, looking at the assets that we have in our communities. People who If we can help them get into the right situation, they can do wonderful things. The trick is to give people hope that things can get better. So I think my lens changed from that, who's responsible, let's arrest them, to why is it happening. We still need to hold people accountable for what they do. And I think people think, when I talk about public health, they think I'm going soft. But I think there's a phrase in Scotland, smart justice. We need smart policing as well. We need to be smarter, because the lack of I think understanding about childhood trauma and what it's doing is actually placing police officers at risk. Police officers are being assaulted every single day. Cops are losing their lives, and they're being run ragged from the time they start the shift to the time they end their shift. And I think police officers need to get better at understanding the communities that they are policing. That they need to understand what's going on. Things like domestic abuse. Domestic abuse is the backstory to lots of the young people that you work with in county lines and gangs. And in many ways, there'll never be peace in the streets until we have peace in the home. We need to really get to grips with things like domestic abuse, because that's the backstory to lots of the issues that we have in society. I think young people are great. I think young people in this world are, this Generation Z, they're going out and saving the planet. They're activists, but they're also the ones that are struggling with mental health. And I think we just sometimes expect young people, especially young boys, just to suck it up. I sucked it up. You can suck it up. No, nonsense. If you look at my generation, we're the ones dying of addictions and suicide. And this generation is the mental health issues. And what I think connects the generations is a lack of support from society. That's why the work that you're doing, John Paul, is great. You're providing that support and giving, because resilience, what I've learned about resilience, it's not something you're born with, it's something you get. You get it from your situation, your surroundings. So yeah, you can see I've completely changed my lens around all of these issues.
But I think that's fair enough. And, like you've shown there, is that the other way, how's that worked out so far? It hasn't. It has to be a shift change, hasn't there? And yes, like you said, we have to lock people up, okay? If somebody stabs somebody or kills somebody, of course that person has to be locked. Nobody's saying they haven't been. However, how do we get to the point where that person came into that position? I saw a tweet a few months ago where somebody was talking about, a police officer talking about how he discovered a 14-year-old in a flat 60 miles from home with 200 wraps of heroin and a massive knife in a bag. And you think, some people would look at that and go, right, brilliant, another one off the street. I'm sitting there going, how the hell did it get to the point where that 14-year-old is 60 miles from home, reported missing? Look, well, none of our lives are perfect, but Jesus, we weren't doing that. So if we're not doing that, again, it's that idea. You have to think about what is the plot twist here? What has happened to put that kid in that position? And I read somebody the other day, about 37% of young people who are getting involved in criminal activity have seen domestic violence at home. And again, it's normalizing violence. It's people who are ready to exploit, who are going, okay, well, look, this is just what we do. It's about stepping away from that and removing that opportunity for people who are just ready to do these young people harm at any given time.
Yeah, and I think it's that perfect storm. Childhood trauma, does rewire your brain, and it does use. If you're not getting connection in your home life, and with your mums and dads, your carers, whatever, you'll seek that connection elsewhere. And some people it's alcohol, some people it's drugs, some people it's the gang, because they give them that sense of worth, that sense of belonging, and that's why we often see young girls being exposed to harmful sexualized behavior, because they're not getting that love and care in the home, and how that can lead to the vulnerability we see in the street. And that example you've just given there about that young person, we need a conversation about young boys just now in our country. We need to have a more productive conversation around what's going on, because if you look at, and I know that girls and other individuals are at risk of grooming and are doing this work, but when you look at our statistics around suicide, violence, victims, perpetrators, county lines, drugs, incarcerations, drug deaths, 7 out of 10 drug deaths in Scotland were men, boys and men. 13.5 men a day take their own life in the UK. We need to have a conversation about what's going on, what's happening, because the vast majority of our boys and all our boys and men are good. we're good. They might do bad things,
Yeah.
but we need to understand where that's come from if we're going to stop in the future. And this whole conversation just now around the war on drugs is something we need to get better at, because the war on drugs is 50 years old this year. Misuse of Drugs Act was 1971. In my younger days as a cop, every single day I'd be searching people under Drugs Act, and in doing so, I probably split families up, ended tenancies, disrupted employment. I probably created more problems than solutions. And yeah, so we need to think differently around these issues. And I think that the war on drugs is actually leading to county lines, gangs, young grooming, exploitation, and leading to violence in our communities. And we need to change that.
And I often think, when you mentioned there about men and boys and how, that's how we need to understand what's going on there because they are adversely affected by these things. I often think there's a kind of a weird paradox with it at the moment, because on one side of the coin, we're talking about toxic masculinity, and we're talking about men and boys, and we're talking about male privilege, and we all understand what that's about. But at the same time, there's a lot of people out there who will end the conversation by basically suggesting that men have it all and boys have it all, so they've got nothing to complain about. But then in the next breath, they'll be going, well, why don't these men and boys talk about their situation? Why won't they talk about their mental health? And you're like, because sometimes, even social media, if you were to switch on social media, sometimes you would, it's put it like this. I remember reading an article in The Guardian a few weeks ago, actually a few months ago, and it was talking about how coronavirus is adversely affecting women. And the statistics were 56% of men were dying and 44% of women. And then it was 52 to 48. And I thought, do you not understand statistics? Do you not understand that, yes, actually more men are dying from coronavirus and contracting it at this time? And I thought, people will see what they want to see. Of course, you will look beyond that and go, okay, there was more women going out to work and all of that. But sometimes it's like, it wouldn't break your heart just to say that something is affecting men worse. And sometimes it feels a lot of that, even especially among politicians, that it really wouldn't be the right thing for them to say. That, oh, well, but this is adversely affecting men. It's like it's almost unfashionable for them to say it. But they will turn up once a year and go, I really wish men would speak out more about their mental health. I really wonder what happened with men issues at the moment. And that's the weird paradox we're in at the moment. I mean, even food banks, I was reading statistics about food banks that I think it was Trussell Trust in 2014 or 2017, 39% of the people using food banks were single men. Mm-hmm. Yet when you often hear about people visiting food banks, there's often talk about single female parents and families.
Yeah.
So why is one not important, can be pushed aside, and why is the other? It's kind of this weird, I don't know, maybe it's just me looking at it from my lens, but no, it's just we need to address these issues and not push them aside and not assume that men are okay and boys are okay.
I think I think there's a narrative that is being created by some men's rights activists out there that society doesn't care about men. I'm gonna try and navigate myself through this. We have that conversation that some people will say there's a war on men. The language against men is so negative. When we talk about male suicide, I don't see women and girls and people saying, "Oh, but what about women?" I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing that at all. But men constantly talk about that. You know what? There is a space to talk about suicide. And that's men. Suicide is men's violence against themselves. But what we're not good at is, as a society, is talking about the other things around the male victimization of violence, usually by other men, the men's perpetration of violence. Yeah, we know girls and women commit violence. We know that. It's a fact. But when you look at the data and the stats and the public health perspective, the risk is boys and men.
The other way,
we need to have that conversation. We need. I think actually, if you look, 40, 50 years ago, women were, in Parliament, they were knocking on doors saying we need to support our girls. We need to eradicate domestic abuse and sexual violence.
We can all agree on that. That's the thing.
Yeah, we can all agree on that. But what I'm not seeing, John Paul, is I'm seeing it in pockets. I'm seeing men. I had an interview a few months ago by a psychologist, an ex lads mag editor who I know. And the interview was 40 minutes, and they spent 35 of those minutes decrying feminism. That's all they
I
did.
know what you're talking about.
And they came with no solution. They came with no solutions about what we need around these issues. And I think that's the problem. That's the problem. Men are not willing to accept that what's going on with our boys and men. And until we accept that, until we accept the negatives that's going on in our culture, like you used the phrase toxic masculinity. I don't like that phrase. You know, masculinity in itself is not toxic. The acts are, and some of the stereotypes are. But if we start using things like toxic masculinity, we're going to get pushback. I use the phrase the mandate of masculinity, the expectations. You know, men don't talk. You know, but that's a myth. Men want to talk. We need to create the conditions for men to talk. That's important. So we need more. You know, I talk a lot in my work about leadership. We need more leadership from boys and men around these issues to look out for each other. But you know, you in your role as a coach, you know, what type of masculinity are you promoting to your young men? You know, we need to. You know, I was asked the other day there, you know, should we get rid of masculinity because it's a harmful stereotype? And I went, no, it's not my fault. I'm born a man. It's not my fault, but it's up to me to do something positive with that. And I think, so we need a new narrative. There isn't, I'll say it, there is no war on men. There's no war on men, but we need to step up and do things like what you're doing with young boys in boxing and support them in their relationships. We need to role model. We need to challenge other men's behavior. You know, if we see a friend, colleagues, fellow coach, you know, being disrespectful about somebody else or belittling a female or whatever, challenge it, because our boys are watching, our girls are watching, and I think that's important.
I totally agree. And you know what? I know the person you were talking about in terms of the half an hour interview, and I actually saw a big stream of a thread of tweets about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks ago from the same person. And my head just hit my hands and I was like, you really just don't get it. You're hitting every single stereotype of exactly why people can't trust us to do things right for ourselves. And that's the problem with some people.
Yeah, and you know,
and maybe they're playing to a crowd. We're living in that attention economy. They know what's going to get retweeted. Maybe there's somebody that's no good to all of us. But I think in terms of masculinity, you know, when I started doing Boxing Saves Lives last year, I did a lot of interviews, and the first people I interviewed was women talking about their issues around boxing and what were the barriers to them coming into a boxing gym. And a lot of it was the perception of masculinity. And a few months ago, I invited somebody from a local mental health charity to come into one of the boxing gyms. And he has this thing where he brings this sign in, you can write a message on there about your mental health. It's called Break Stigma. So we came down to the local gym. I think it was about 11 lads were in the gym that evening. And he came in and he stood up and he talked about his experience. We weren't talking about somebody who was suffering with anxiety and depression. We're talking about somebody who had suffered with psychosis and been through the other end of it, being, sectioned. And, he stood up in front of everybody in the gym and told his experience and just said, look, is anybody fancy coming up and, writing a little message, and we'll have a photograph and put it out on social media. And every single one in the gym stood up. Every single man in the gym stood up. And I just thought, you know what? Are gyms masculine, or are there just lots of men there? Why do we have to assume that, I'm sure there are people, and there are people who do have, misogynistic behaviors, absolutely. But are we assuming that they're very, very masculine, or is there just lots of men in there? Because
it's how you define, there's a lot of folk will talk about masculinities as a plural, and it's about how do we, as men, how do we start to create that form of masculinity that we are proud of, that we aspire other young people, other young men to follow. And it's about being respectful. It's about being kind. It's about, it's okay for boys to be physically strong. It's okay. But we also want boys to be emotionally strong as well. And, these are the tools and skills that our boys need. And anybody working with young men, young boys just now, I run a course, Boys to Men, with a friend of mine. It runs 2 or 3 times a year. And one of the activities we do with the group is we think about, if you look at my office, I've got speakers, I've got a drum kit behind me, I've got a fancy cat. As boys, we love our gadgets. I've got my fancy microphone, I've got all this. And we love our stuff. We like to be surrounded by our stuff. And this activity, Boys Need Stuff, it gets people, parents, coaches, youth workers to think, like, what stuff do boys need to be good men in 2021 and beyond? And it's traits, it's skills, it's attributes. And for me, if we're working with young boys, we need to, as quickly as possible, help develop their character. And character is about what they stand for. What do they believe in? I call it their brand. And it's their values. You'll have a set of core values that you follow, you try to follow. And I don't think I see it more in America when I work in the States. They're really good at instilling value, especially in sports, in college, high school. They really talk about values. We see it a lot in professional sports in this country. But we also see a lot of young men not adhering to values of sports, during COVID, having parties. They're clearly not living up to the values of their club. So we need to sit down with our young men and help them develop their brand. What do they represent? That phrase character, if you go back to the ancient Roman days, the character was spelt with a K, and the character was the imprint on the coin. It was the imprint. Right. So what's your imprint on your life? What's the imprint in the world that you're going to give? How are people going to look at you? And that's about just sitting down with them and get them to start thinking about what do they want other people to see in that individual. And that's part of your job as a coach, is to get them thinking about their honesty, integrity, but helping them develop their own brand. That's important for me. So these are things we can be doing with young people.
Yeah, and I think it is sometimes it's just a matter of having conversations with people, because like I said to people, young people, I can tell them all about my story and all the, the crack I was up to years ago and the trouble I got in at school and all the stuff that happened after all that. But sometimes young people just want to be heard. And we get to a point sometimes when, boys or girls, they just want to hear somebody to hear them when they speak, and we can get very used to being in a family environment where, in even the best families, you can kind of be a little bit isolated in them. But in the very worst, you can be full of fear and never being able to speak your truth or come out with anything without, fear of retribution. And like we had somebody last week who came in and seen a coach for the first time, and he's talking to somebody who's fostered, and there was a conversation with the foster parent, and after the boxing session, having spoken to the coach, and the coach actually happens to be a foster carer as well. But the minute that was spoken, then the young man started talking and opening up about situations that were happening. And that it was absolutely brilliant to see. And it's just a matter of just having those conversations and letting that person, speak and hearing them. That's the thing, hearing them. I don't think we have an awful lot of that. My biggest worry as well, Graham, is that it's a bit like when I worked as a debt advisor years ago. You're dealing with people in really difficult situations. I work for charities and that, and you go, oh my God, it's difficult. And then your mind's going, God, imagine the ones I don't get to see.
I know.
That's the thing. The young people we don't get to see. And that's what I think about, even especially over Christmas and that. You wonder what's happening to young boys and girls out there that we will never even touch our radar. It's a worry, isn't it?
Is it? And I think you made a point there. It's important that we give young people the space, but they also want to hear you as well be vulnerable. They also want, you give permission as a coach to talk about, as a friend of mine calls it, this sort of revolutionary honesty that we all need to have. It's like when I work in prisons as an ex-police officer, I can't hide the fact that I'm an ex-cop, because they'll smell it from 100 yards, in many ways. So I talk about, I'm honest about, 20 years locking you up. So that's what I did. So someone just texted me there. I don't know why that's gone off. But I'm honest about my mistakes as a police officer. And I think if you're a coach, you talk about things you got up to as a lad. But if you can invest even in 10, 15 minutes of a conversation with young people, you're creating the space for that discussion. My brand is Cultivating Minds. I love cultivating discussions. I just think, we're in a country just now where we are so divided. We're taking sides, and we need people to be in the middle of these conversations to really help people, see other sides of the story. I suppose that's what we need to be thinking about. How do we get into that middle ground and create the space for conversations so that young people can start to see their views, because we have lots of young people just now doing things that are completely contrary to their values, because they think that's what other people are doing. Yeah. And I think we see that around knife carrying. We have this media frenzy and police frenzy about imagery on social media about knives. And the psychology says you're just driving the problem. You're just creating more problems. You're creating a belief that all young people are behaving in that way. So I need to carry a knife to protect myself. So we need to really radically think about our narrative, our communications. And and I sometimes think police egos get in the way. Look at us, we're solving all this crime. Good, but don't always talk. You don't have to talk about it. Just do it. Just get on with it. And actually, in many ways, the public attitudes about crime is often completely contrary to what the reality is. We have a society in the UK who are scared about violence. We have violence, but not at the level that the public think we do. And that's something we need. And I think the media drive that, the police drives that. So we need to really, take a step back and think: do we need to be putting pictures of knives on social media? Because what are we communicating to young people?
And young people could be looking at going, wow, if that bit knife's out there, I need a bigger one than that, don't they? You know what I mean? That's the thing. And again, it's that moral panic created by the media. So they're looking at it going, right, how do we shift it? How do we shift, 200, a dwindling number now of newspapers are going, right, there was 60 people murdered in London last year. Okay, there was 7,999,940 that weren't murder. Which one's going to sell us a newspaper? Right, okay, we're going to go with the same. It is basically, that's the story that needs to be told. And, fear is our basic instinct. We're actually worried about that. We're worried about, that's how I think it goes anyway, is that we will read something if we're worried about it. So there's always that market for people to keep telling people that things are.
And you know what? We need to, 60 people losing their lives is shocking. That it still needs to be talked about, but we need to balance it out with the great work that's going on around violence prevention. So we give people we don't ignore that. In Scotland, I think back in 2004, we had roughly 160 homicides a year, really high. And last year we've down to about 60 homicides. So we haven't got all the flags out and saying, hey, we've solved the problem. It's still 60 people who have, predominantly men, who've lost their lives. There's work still to be done, but we are communicating what's going on, but we're also communicating the great work that we're doing, that Scotland's doing as a whole, not just the VRU or the government, what Scotland is doing to deal with the issues. And that's not I don't see the balance enough in England and Wales.
Yeah, I agree. And it's the same, as much as we kind of give out about where we live and that, and we often talk about, a quarter of people being affected by mental health issues. That means 75% of people might not be. However, you don't give up on the quarter, do you? So again, it is important to highlight it like it is about it. But I think there's a lot more of a driven agenda from people who are actually, it's more of a, okay, well, we're going to tell you about this because we know you read it. We know you read it because we can make money. And it's just a really odd way. Whereas, the old idea is trend before truth now. That's where it is now. Everything is, you can go halfway across the internet before anybody checks whether a story is true or not anymore. As long as it's selling, as long as it can trend, it's really odd. So, but I think that we've got a way to go. But all we can do is just try and keep our little bit clear, trying to keep our, keep our end of the bargain and see where we go from it. But it's all about just treating the cause of things and not just the symptoms, not just the symptoms. Sorry. But we've spoken about masculinity, Graham. So talk me through what you see the issues around what young girls are facing in your experience from what you've been working over the last few years, and how has that progressed?
I think, a lot of it's all linked in. Young people, young girls, young boys. We see a lot we see that. I think last year in England and Wales and the UK, there was an increase in suicides amongst young girls, teenagers. I'm sure it was 15 to 20, early sort of teen into 20s. An increase in men were still, boys and men still the most at-risk group. But I think we're living in a really sexualized society just now, a sexualized environment, which is having an impact on young boys' behavior and expectations in relationships. We see a lot of that. We see a lot of, we've seen big increases in sexual violence in Scotland and I think around the UK as well in the last 10, 12 years. And while some of that will be historical, we can't ignore the impact of culture that our young people are growing up in. And if we ignore culture, you know, it will eat us for breakfast, as the saying goes. And, you know, we're living in a real pornified culture just now. That's not just impacting negatively on young girls, it's impacting negatively on young boys as well. But I think young girls, you know, if you look at, you know, modern day pornography, it's, you know, men win, women lose. It's a harmful narrative that is impacting negatively on expectations in relationships. So I think there's that desire for girls, and we've had this for a long time, to look certain ways, to behave in certain ways, to play into the stereotypes of to be that perfect girl, and that's leading to young girls just not being themselves. And just like if you're a young boy not being yourself, you're not in control. You're not being authentic, and that presents you with, you know, risks around victimization, being groomed potentially through grooming gangs, you know, county lines, or just through the some men that out there that act in that way. So I think, you know, there is clear challenges out for young girls, and what has been good is that we've responded to that. You know, if you look at, you know, women's organizations for the last few decades have been talking about this stuff for decades. Yeah. And there's, you know, in Scotland we have a working group on girls and women and supporting girls and women. We talk a lot about young women's self-esteem, building their confidence, investing in victim services, investing in prevention in schools around these issues, and that has to happen. But you know what? That will be undermined unless we do something similar with our boys, because our boys are struggling academically, in relationships, and sexually, and all the great work we're doing with girls, will have an impact. But when it comes to the violence, I think we're just not supporting it, all young people, by just focusing on one part of the issue. And that's why I'm a great believer in, you know, we need a specific focus about our young boys and young men in society. But young girls, the challenges of sort and suicide, social media for girls is horrendous. What they have to put up with, you know, not just young girls, but adults as well. Adult women are putting up with horrendous things on social media. And some people, well, you know, I think there was somebody from a men's organization was talking, but male politicians are getting more threats online. Yeah, that might be the case, but they don't live in a culture where men are routinely sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's not a competition anyway, so that's
not, and that's the problem. Whereas girls and women, but girls and women live in a society where they fear sexual violence. They fear it. You know, they order their day. You know, they'll go out for a run in the park, and there'll be no earphones in because they're concerned that something's going to happen. You know, they will choose a certain route home because they'll get a cab home, or they'll phone the friends when they get home because they fear sexual violence. You know, I got the town when the town's open in the future. I don't fear being sexually assaulted. You know, I don't fear that, but girls do fear that, and I think, you know, it's we sometimes play off each other a little bit, and men will say, "Oh, but men are victims." Yeah, they are, and that's wrong. But we need to focus on girls and women. We need to do that, and I think as men, we need to understand their challenges, and I think women understand our challenges. That's why, you know, when we talk about suicide, we don't get that backlash from women's organizations saying, "Oh, but women die as well." We don't get that, but we get that with men. You know, when we talk about domestic abuse in England and Wales, you know, the vast majority of our victims are girls and women. But when we talk about that, some men will say, "Oh, but men are victims too." Yeah, they are. Men are victims, women are victims, trans individuals are victims. We need a gender inclusive approach to these issues. Anybody can be a victim, but sometimes we shouldn't be having a gender neutral response. It's a bit like Black Lives Matter. It's a classic example, and people will say all lives matter. You know, it's just, you know, we have a lack of stamina from white individuals, especially white men, and we have a lack of stamina from men around violence against women issues. And we need, as men, we need to grow a pair in many ways and listen. And it doesn't mean we don't talk about male victims. We can still do that. But we need to sometimes put a focus, a highlight, but like male suicide, we're putting a focus on male suicide. People get that. So why can't we do the same around issues facing girls and women? But we don't do that. And I think it's something in our DNA as men that we get on the defensive and we fight back.
I think what you've mentioned there about the idea of this idea that pornography has progressed, in people, and there's this expectation among young people. I think years ago, and again, it's a bit like that thing again, we're being a bit nostalgic, but years ago, seeing pornography was like somebody at school would find a book and have a book and it get put in the school. Whereas now it's in the palm of your hand. You literally look at a phone and somebody would be sending that around school and 1,000 people could see that.
Yeah.
But, and then it's creating these shortcuts for young men that are watching that and going, well, is this how it is now? There's no intimacy, there's nothing involved, there's none of that. It's literally just looking and there's a submissive woman on the screen, and that's how relationships work. And of course, the biggest victim there, of course, is the woman, because there's this assumption that men just turn up and here we are, this is what's going to happen.
I think, porn nowadays, as I said a little while ago, porn is sexist, violent, misogynistic. Men are the winners and women are the losers. And I think that we need to look at it that respect, but we also need to talk about the health implications of pornography. It's young men men in general can go online and click on, they can get. It's a bit like going. Maybe it's not the wrong analogy, but it's about like going into a cake shop and seeing all these cakes, and you're able to try every single one. Because it's like a big rush of dopamine to the front part of the brain, and the teenage brain is not designed to deal with this influx of dopamine to the brain. I think that's the science behind it. So that is, it's an addiction, that it's creating addictions in young men. It's creating erectile dysfunction in young men. So there's a health conversation as well we need to be having with our young boys, not just that, that's not what happens, that's not consensual or whatever, or the violence issue. We need to have another conversation which is about health. It's if you're going to watch this stuff, be careful, because it's not without risk. We have young boys, young men at 18, 19 going to the doctors with issues they should be getting in their 70s and 80s, because of the constant exposure and the constant use of pornography. And it's creating issues. And I think coaches need to be aware of that as well. Coaches, an awareness of, I think they say the earliest age is about 8 or 9 years old. As young boys are being exposed to pornography. And I think a lot of boys are uncomfortable with what they're seeing. Even in their teens, they're being shown it by their friends. They're uncomfortable with it, but they go along with it because they think that's what they need to do. That mandate of masculinity that I talk about. And we need to help our boys navigate quite a challenging world, and we need to do it with our girls as well.
And like you said, ultimately it's women who lose in that situation. And then when you move on to things like social media and Instagram, is again you lose for women, because now there's created this whole culture how girls should look and how they should behave and how it's important, how it's really materialistic, and it's like everybody's living their best life, and and this is how you're comparing yourself. And when I interviewed boxers over last summer, and it's 3 or 4 of them, and a young girl as well, and these are people who are incredibly fit, I would say incredibly good looking without judging them, and on aesthetically good looking. But those were the first people to tell me, I'm really worried about social media. They were worried about it. Yeah. They're worried about it. They're like, oh, social media. And that is that is unprompted. That is they're offering that information to go and I'm really worried about young people on social media and what they're expected to live up to.
It's funny because you talk about, men winning and women losing. Ultimately, men lose out of this as well. And that's the paradox about this whole thing, is that men are losing in their relationships with themselves and with other people. That's why we need to have that's the conversation we need to be having. It's not just about this is all bad for women, it's bad for boys and men as well, because men are not leading fruitful, authentic lives with friends and intimate partners as well. And so I think these are and social media, you talk about social media in itself isn't the problem. We're here today conversing through Zoom, we're having a conversation. It's the relationships that take place on social media that is the problem, that is leading to an increase in suicide amongst young women. It's the exposure to harmful online content with no buffer. What is the counterbalance to pornography? Because the porn industry is going nowhere, right? So it's going nowhere. It's here to stay, and so we need a counterbalance. And the counterbalance is more positive conversations about masculinity. It's about consent, talking about consent. It's helping boys understand that, you know what, you don't have to see this stuff. And many boys don't want to watch this stuff because they care deeply about girls and women in their lives. They don't want to watch it, but they feel they have to watch it. And it's that I don't know. I know you're recording this. I don't know if I can share my screen just now. Can you let me share? I want to show you a video, and that will come. It'd be a good one to have in the record. If you can can you authorize me to share my screen? I think you can do that on your settings. If you go into set, if you make me a co-host.
Let me do.
If you
meeting settings.
If you go into, I think even if you go into participants beside my name and just make me a co-host, I think you can do that.
Right, you know what? We got into this so quick. I didn't even get a chance to introduce you at the beginning, Graham. That's how good we've been.
No,
so far.
It's fine. If you go into participants and beside my name, you should be able to. If not, I can send you the link.
There you go.
Right,
there we go.
Now, am I the co-host? So let's try this. Right, okay. So I'm working now. So this is a clip from a film that you can watch this film on YouTube. It's a really good film, and it's about a coming of age film from America. It's called The Sandlot, and the film's the film's on Sky. And so it's set in America. It's centered around baseball. It's about a summer, and there's two little groups of young boys, and this is a really good, quite a good clip. But it talks about the pressures our boys are under.
And fat kids, Rodriguez. Shut your mouth, Phillips. Would you say crap face? I said you shouldn't even be allowed to touch a baseball. Except for Rodriguez, you're all an insult to the game. Come on! We'll take you on right here, right now! Come on! We plan a real diamond, Porter. You ain't good enough to lick the dirt off our cleats. Watch it, jerk. Shut up, idiot. Moron! Scab eater! Butt sniffer! Puss licker! Fart smeller! You eat dog crap for breakfast, geek. You make your weave with your mama's toe jam. Yeah! You bought apples in the toilet, and you like it. You play ball like a girl.
So it's that call to arms now. Yeah. Let me come back to you. And you know, my friend Don McPherson wrote a book called it's here, and it's called You Throw Like a Girl. And Don's an ex-NFL football Hall of Famer, and he wrote a book about expectations of masculinity that were placed on our boys. And you saw that in that clip. You know, them playing up to each other. You know, I think boys are grappling. They don't want to get into fights. They don't want to, be involved in certain things. But then that ultimate insult, you throw like a girl. The worst thing that a boy can be called by another boy is a girl, anything feminine. And what does that then just reinforces the system we have in society around men up here, women down here. But the paradox is that men are struggling. Men are in prisons, dying. All the things that are designed to support and make us great as men are actually killing us.
Yeah.
And that's the paradox. And we need to get that conversation out there to parents, to teachers, to youth workers, to coaches, so they start to have these conversations with our boys. It's different. It's a more positive conversation where we look out for each other.
Brilliant. And look, Graham, thank you so much for meeting me today virtually. You've got so many people out there that I've actually met over the last year through Zoom and through all things, and there will be a time when I'm actually going to meet people in person, hopefully. And you're going to be doing a lot of work with the Veru over the next year and so. Tell me a little bit more about that.
The plan is to they're really interested in some of the work that I do. I do a lot of work around bystander engagement, around how do we help people around victims and around the bully or the perpetrator of violence, because there's a lot of people out there who see the build up to, for example, if we see a knife incident in London or Birmingham or in Glasgow, that explosion of violence doesn't just happen. It doesn't just blow up. It starts with disrespect, name calling, whatever it starts. So bystanders often witness the build up to situations. So my passion is how do we help society to look out for red flags in their friends' behavior and do something. But also, how do we use the approach to build empathy and compassion in society? I talk a lot about domestic abuse in my work. So how do we build knowledge and give people the tools to spot domestic abuse in a friend and as a victim? The most powerful thing that any one of us could say to a friend who is a victim of bullying, hate crime, domestic abuse, sexual violence is, that wasn't your fault. All of us can easily say that in the first few seconds of you seeing something, or if a friend tells you, male or female, whoever, tells you they've been a victim, listen, thank you for telling me that wasn't your fault. That's a very powerful thing to say to somebody. And that's a bystander intervention. So, I say it, the biggest resource that we have is not being engaged. And the biggest resource is society. A lot of the violence work is, what I like about Kimberly's work is that she's developing this village. She's bringing the community. She's got a great event next week with parents that I'm speaking at, because a lot of violence work sometimes is kept within professional corridors, echo chambers. And we need to get it out to, I often say we need to get it out to my mum. My mum's great, but it's people who are obviously sometimes fixed in their viewpoints about, we need to be tough. These folk need to go to jail. And you know what? We need to get the conversation out to these individuals to change their mindset around issues. So I'm hoping that they're going to take on board some of the work that I'm doing. And maybe we could do something around coaching. I get the impression Kimberly is really switched on to having conversations and giving the community the tools to do the job, because prevention starts in the community. It's fact. It starts with you. It starts with the workers in an office. It starts with players in a sports team. It starts with coaches. You are part of you're all little communities, and for me, it's about how do we get all the communities in motion, moving together, and it's about making things better, having better outcomes for young people. So that's the flow we need to develop, and if we can get that flow going, we can achieve these things.
Brilliant. I think you're absolutely right, is that we do need to start spreading it out to people, because we could all stand around the room and have these conversations, but actually we know these things. It's about reaching out to those other people, going, like you say, your mum or my mum, saying, okay, actually, I know where you're coming from. We keep locking them up, but how's that working out? It's not really working, is it? What else can we do? And it's difficult sometimes, because we do a lot of, if you do a lot of training, sometimes the people who turn up for trainings are not actually the people who really need it. It's the people, I remember running death courses years ago, and people couldn't turn up, and you're like, you're not the people we really want, but thank you for coming. But really, the people who really need to be here aren't here. It was about trying to, I don't want to call people hard to reach, but just trying to push them that bit further out and actually trying to change hearts and minds. I actually think there is another way.
But
it's for everybody.
It's like, this conversation today, in your role, John Paul, is to talk to your friends about this work, and I'm sure you're doing that. I did it with my mum, with my parents, with my daughters. At first, my daughters thought I was mad. They thought, "Oh, here we go, Graham, your dad, you're going on about this stuff again. Come on, it's rubbish." But now they get it. My daughter's, in her last phases of becoming a social worker, she gets the stuff, and she wants to make a big difference. She wants to get into that. But in the past, she would be a bit unaware. But I think society's been peddled this tough on crime narrative for decades, and it's hard for me just to expect people just to think the same as I do. Because bear in mind, 15 years ago, I would have been that hang 'em, flog 'em cop that we see a lot of still. And so my job is to take it outside. And you spoke to James Docket's biggest frustration is we need to stop talking about it within our echo chamber and get it done and start going out there. We still need to have a conversation. We still need to talk about this stuff, because there's still a lot of people out there who don't get this, and we need to not force them to see it. We need to make the invisible visible. How do we make, just now it's invisible. How do we make it visible so that you can't, because when you see things like this, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to your old way. You can't go back to 20 years ago and hang and lock them up brigade. You need to do both. You need to walk and chew gum. And what I mean by that is you need to hold people accountable, but asking the why question. Why is this happening? What is going on here? So that's the two journeys we need to be having in society.
you're spot on, and I think that's it. Is how do we change it in such a way that we actually make it important enough for people to actually get it on the radar and go, oh, actually make their ears prick up and look and go, actually that is a different way.
And that's the reciprocity that we all want that. If I do this, what will I get in return? That's what we call reciprocity. So for me, the reciprocity for society is less violence on our streets, a less likelihood that a friend, family member, colleague will be a victim of violence in your circle of friends, less money on taxes to violence and prisons and dealing with the outcomes of violence. So these are the outcomes. So actually, if we do this like this, we'll have safer communities. We will have reduced risks. We will have safe streets with police officers. We will spend less money a year on dealing with people going to jail. Prisons are there for the few, but unfortunately, they're full of the many just now. And we need to. The best place to rehabilitate is in the community. That's the best place to rehabilitate. That's a scary thought for my mum.
Yeah. But the truth as well is that as much as we know this, we will never have the same level of a voice of people who are in the media who want to tell your mum that she needs to be scared. That's the biggest problem. That's our biggest challenge. Is it so? But I don't know. Try and change one heart and mind one person at a time, and keep going. And
it's a consistent narrative.
Able to show it.
It's a consistent narrative. That's what we need. The VRU in Scotland has been successful for a number of reasons, but for me, the main success is from the minute one they had a consistent narrative of early years. Get young, get in the young. Look at trauma and drive that message. The challenge, I think, for VRUs in England and Wales is to keep that narrative going. Is to invest in things that work and keep moving forward. And I'm great. They've got funding for the next year, but that's every year they're going to be thinking at the Home Office. The Home Office is going to stop the funding. That's a challenge because we can't just stop doing the work you're doing or what other people are doing just because we don't get funding. If it works, then why are we stopping it? So the challenge for the VRUs is how do you start to embed some of the work that you're doing as mainstream? It's not needing government funding. It's been funded, by other sources.
And you can build that job security around people so they can forward plan for 3 years and go, right, this is what we're going to roll out for you year 1, year 2, and that. And it gives everybody that consistency and security to do everything they can because everybody's moving in the right direction, trying to do the right thing. Yeah. So, Graham, thank you so much for joining me today. Like I said, normally at the start of these things, I do a little bit of an introduction, but we went bang into it.
No, listen, mate, it's great. I'm sure people will get an understanding of what I've done in the past in policing, and and we can change our mindset, and it's okay to think differently. It's not a weakness to change your mind, to change your mindset. I think we live in a society where to change our mind, it's seen as a weakness. It's not, and I feel more aware of situations. I feel more able to talk about situations. I feel compassion. Yeah. And it's a nice thing. I don't have anger in me that I probably had when I was a younger police officer. I don't have that anymore. And I think violence is preventable, not inevitable. It's something we can really come together to help out and deal with.
As long as we're just focusing our energies at the right part and early intervention and working from there, basically. So.
Yeah, but it's looking at the whole life course of a person, not just in the early years, but people who have not had that good care at start. The evidence says we can still support them. We can still not so much fix them, but we can retrofit resilience, give them the skills. When people come out of prison, we still need to deal with that. Employment is one of the best things we could give people: safe, stable home life, and you can give that in the first 3 years, or you can give it in your 20s and 30s. And it's we need to be giving people jobs and employment is the key for reducing offending, because a lot of people are coming out of prison and thinking, what's the point? What's the point of me getting up today? What's the point? And I think give people a reason to get up in the morning is something we talked about in Scotland many years ago. Give people in the science of good health, it's sense of coherence, sense that it's a consistent and coherence in your life, that you can get up and you've got things to do.
Structure, literally that structure. Yeah.
There you go.
Graham, thank you so much. Well, I'll be tuning in on the 25th as well, so I'll look forward to early then as well. And honestly, I'm really thankful for you taking the time and chatting to me today. And I'll get this video together and get it out on YouTube. And Look forward to seeing you on the 25th.
And you take care. And we'll listen, once we get out of this period just now, I'm going to, Kimberly wants me to come down. So we'll do that and we can hook up and come to the gym and see what the guys are up to. Okay.
100%. Thanks a million.
Take care, my friend. Have a good day and speak soon.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.